Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. We welcome you to the first of what we hope to be many different discussions around arts advocacy and some of the main tenets of what that means and how that it can be effective. First up in this long-term discussion is about voting in this state. As I'm sure many of you know, there have been many different there's been a lot of waxing and waning as it relates to voting in the state. Unfortunately, we're one of the more complicated states of the country in terms of voting. And I have a friend who's running for Secretary of State. And as he would say, if you need a flow chart to vote in the state, then your voting is too complicated. So with that, we have one of the experts, probably the expert on voting right now in terms of up-to-date information in Denise Lieberman. She's with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. And I asked her, after hearing many good things about that group, that organization, which she will talk more about, but one of the, along with ACLU of Mo, the only two, is that correct, Denise, that have filed lawsuit with the state to make voting a little less complicated this cycle. So we are very proud to have her. I thank her for sharing her time. She's a busy woman, and we're glad to get just a little bit of her time to come talk to us about that. So with that, I will hand it over to Denise. Just a reminder that this is recorded, so please keep questions. So please keep questions. Anything you wouldn't want it to have on recording, and it's mostly because we want to be able to share this with as wide an audience as possible to get factual, succinct information from the expert themselves. So with that, Denise, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here today. I'm really thrilled to be able to be here, and in particular to talk to an arts organization, because there really is, there's a role for everybody and everyone's talents in the fight to ensure that everybody can cast a ballot. And so I'm really excited to be able to talk with you today. And I am gonna share some slides, if that's okay. Okie dokie. So I'm with the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition is a nonpartisan statewide network of voter advocacy organizations that work to protect the right to vote. We've been collaborating since 2006 for 14 years. We came together when Missouri first passed its first iteration of a strict photo ID law to try and fight that, and we actually were successful fighting that in court. That law was struck down as unconstitutional in Missouri, but lawmakers continued to introduce strict photo ID laws, and so we kept coming back together. And here we are 14 years later, continuing to fight for the right to vote in the state of Missouri. Our coalition is really broad-based. Like I said, we're a nonpartisan organization that works to protect the right to vote. Our coalition includes probably around 50 organizations that cover everything from civil rights organizations to student organizations, to disability advocacy organizations, to student groups, and a whole lot more. Excuse me one second. Excuse me. I'm sorry about that. And what I also wanted to share was that our coalition also includes arts organizations. One of our coalition partners is Dance the Vote in St. Louis, and I want to uplift them because, of course, we're talking here with the Regional Arts Council in Kansas City. And Dance the Vote made a really terrific video about absentee and mail-in voting, and right before the August elections. And so it was really exciting to be able to collaborate in so many different ways. And so, as I mentioned, there is really a lane for all of us, whether you are in the arts, whether you dance, whether you sing, whether you're a lawyer like me, or whether you are just someone who cares about ensuring that all people can cast a ballot. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, we achieve our goals, which of course include to ensure that all eligible voters can cast a ballot in Missouri, through 4 buckets of work. We do policy advocacy, for example. We lobby at the Missouri legislature. We track legislation related to voting and testify in favor of measures that would make voting more accessible. We testify against measures that would make voting less accessible. We also do legal advocacy and litigation, and so we are in court right now, in fact, getting ready to go to trial in a case challenging the notary requirements for mail-in ballots in Missouri. And we do a wide variety of other type of legal advocacy as well. We meet with elections officials in advance of elections and talk through best practices that we capture from around the country. We also do robust education and trainings. We have palm cards, we have webinars, we do all kinds of speaking engagements and trainings, and we have training templates and modules and toolkits and all kinds of things that help make the process of voting a little more accessible to people. And finally, our signature program is election protection, which we coordinate statewide in Missouri. It is part of the nation's largest nonpartisan election protection effort. Includes the 866 Our Vote hotline, which is live. You can call it right now. It's answered by attorneys who will be able to do everything from checking your voter registration to identifying your polling place to being able to answer questions about how to cast a ballot and how voting works in Missouri, as well as capture any incidents or concerns that you may have. So before we jump into voting by mail, the first thing I want to highlight is the importance of voter registration. Because if we're not registered, it doesn't matter, because we're not going to be able to cast a ballot. And Missouri does not have same-day voter registration like some states do. And so you do have to register in advance, about a month in advance of Election Day. The voter registration deadline in Missouri for the November elections is October 7th. And we at the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition are a national partner of National Voter Registration Day, which is on September 22nd. So if you're looking for a good hook to uplift the importance of registering to vote or checking your registration, that's a really great day to do it. In Missouri, you are able to register online. You can also update your registration online. So if you've moved since you last registered to vote, you'll want to update your voter registration by that October 7th deadline. So let's jump into really what I think everyone came here today to talk about, and that is how can we safely cast a ballot in the midst of this pandemic? You know, this COVID-19 crisis has upended virtually all aspects of our lives, and certainly has thrown a monkey wrench into an already complex voting process. Here we are in a presidential election year where the stakes really couldn't be higher. And many people are wondering, how can I safely cast a ballot this year? I want to participate, but I also want to stay safe. And I also want to keep my family safe. I don't want to have to worry about contracting or spreading this disease in a crowded polling place. And so lots of people are talking about, can we vote by mail? And the answer is, in Missouri, yes, but it's a little bit complicated. And it's rendered a little more complicated by the fact that we're in court challenging some aspects of the law. We actually go to trial next week, and we are in the midst of depositions and all kinds of other legal advocacy around the issues involved in Missouri's process of voting by mail. I'm going to skip this. So I want to though, just go over what the process is as it exists now, because it is a little bit complicated. Missouri recently passed a new law that expands some options to cast ballots by mail. And the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition just released our newest Palm card, which you see here on your screen, that details how to cast a ballot. And the first thing that you want to do is determine what kind of ballot is right for you. And this is a little bit complicated because here in Missouri, if you want to vote absentee, you have to have a reason. And so that's why I'm calling it an excuse-based absentee ballot. And Missouri is actually in the minority of states that require people to have a reason to vote absentee. 34 states plus the District of Columbia allow any voter to cast an absentee ballot in advance of Election Day for any reason whatsoever. And that's something actually that the Missouri Voter Protection Coalition has been advocating for quite a long time. If we had that in Missouri, we probably wouldn't have to be in court right now. Everybody would simply be able to cast an absentee ballot if they wanted to. But that is not the case. Here in Missouri, you do need to have a reason to cast an absentee ballot. And it's one of these 7 reasons that you see here on the left side of your screen. Now, I will say that thanks to the new law that was passed and signed into law in June, if you do not meet one of those 7 reasons to vote absentee, you will, for 2020, be able to still cast a no excuse mail-in ballot. But those ballots are a little bit more difficult to obtain. They're a little bit more difficult to cast, and those ballots have to be notarized. In addition, mail-in ballots can only be returned to the election authority by United States mail. And that's a really big difference because absentee ballots are a little bit easier to request, and they can also be returned in person if necessary. That's something that we're hearing a lot of people concerned about because of potential delays in the mail. And I will say that the United States Postal Service did send a letter to Missouri Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft expressing some concerns about the potential for mail delays with those mail-in ballots. In particular, expressing some concerns that there is a risk that some voters may not be able to get those mail-in ballots mailed back in time. So if you are able to vote absentee and you find yourself getting close to that deadline, you can return those absentee ballots in person. Mail-in ballots you cannot. So the first thing that you want to do is figure out what type of ballot is right for you. You are eligible to vote absentee if you will be outside of your jurisdiction. That's a very common one. Sometimes people travel. If you're outside of your jurisdiction means if you're outside of your county where you're currently registered to vote. So even if you work outside of your county, you would be eligible to vote absentee for that reason. You can also vote absentee if you expect to be incapacitated or confined due to illness or disability, or are serving as a caretaker for someone who is. So for example, I qualify to vote absentee under this provision because I serve as a caretaker for my 89-year-old mother who is homebound. People that vote absentee for that reason do not need to have that ballot notarized. You also can vote absentee if a religious belief would prevent you from going to the polls, if you are working as a poll worker on election day, if you are incarcerated but retain the right to vote, for example, people in pretrial detention who've not been convicted of anything. If you are in an address confidentiality program, some domestic violence victims or people in witness protection, for example, would fall into that category. And thanks to the new law that was passed this year, you can also vote absentee without a notary if you fall into one of the listed at-risk categories for COVID-19. And again, those 2 health-related reasons, if you're confined due to illness or if you're in an at-risk category for COVID-19, do not require a notary. And so how do you know if you are, yes?
Just can I interrupt real quick? a question about that while we're talking about that. I've heard a couple of different people mention the at-risk categories with, as you're getting into this here. Some people I think have confused this to mean like you have been around someone who's had it, or either you have had it or whatever, but it is specific to, it's listed on the ballot, these items you have listed here, correct?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Sorry.
The law is pretty specific. And so to qualify to vote absentee because you're in an at-risk category for COVID, you would need to fall into one of these 8 categories. And I think your point is well taken. It covers a lot of people, but it doesn't cover everybody that might be in an at-risk category for COVID. And it doesn't necessarily cover people who maybe aren't in one of these categories themselves, but they live with somebody who is vulnerable. And in fact, that's the case with several of our clients in our lawsuit. They don't qualify to vote absentee without a notary, but they are living with vulnerable family members who they don't want to expose by having to go vote in person or to go find a notary in person. So the at-risk categories that allow you to vote absentee, you can vote absentee without a notary. And this applies to any voter over the age of 65. So that's going to be a lot of people. Any voter who's in a long-term care facility, regardless of age. And with chronic lung disease who has moderate to severe asthma, regardless of age. Anybody with a serious heart condition, anybody who is immunocompromised, anybody with diabetes, anybody with liver disease, and anybody with chronic kidney disease who's on dialysis.
Denise, can I ask one more question? Serious heart condition. Some have questioned whether that includes things like hypertension. Do you know? Is that covered under the serious heart condition?
Yeah, it's sort of unclear. This is the statute reads exactly as I've listed it.
As you've listed it, yeah.
Right. And so this is also part of the issue is that sometimes people don't,
Sure.
not only does it not cover sort of everybody or cover people who live with people who might fall into one of these conditions, it doesn't really explain if you have other attending conditions.
Right. Or, I may consider my asthma moderate, but it also is such that I don't have to treat it every day. So therefore, I could consider myself that, but yet my doctor wouldn't consider me that, and so I do think part of this is the confusion of even these, additional categories that we're able to vote at. And, everyone is at risk of contracting COVID. So that's another kind of confusing language barrier there, is that we all are at risk, but yet, it's categorized as being heightened at risk by these 8 categories or so. So thank you for clearing that up.
Now, what I will say is that people don't have to provide any extra information. So I'm going to show you here the application to get either an absentee or a mail-in ballot. And what you can see is that you simply need to list one of those 7 reasons. You don't need to provide additional medical information. You don't need to state which of the at-risk categories you fall in, if you fall into one of them, to vote absentee without a notary. If you assert that you are confined due to illness or disability, you don't need to state what that is or who you're caretaking for. This is really, it is about the voter believing in good faith that they fall into one of these categories. So this is a self-determined kind of list, okay? The other thing so the first thing that you want to do is determine whether you are able to cast an absentee ballot. If you don't feel that you fall into one of those 7 categories, again, you can cast a ballot by mail. But again, those ballots have to be notarized. The other thing that I'll mention here is that you can also vote absentee in person. And so this is another way, if you have concerns about the back and forth over the mail, if you meet one of those 7 reasons, you can vote absentee in person at your local election authority beginning on September 22nd. And that absentee voting period will go all the way until the day before Election Day. You can go and vote absentee in person until 5 p.m. on Monday, November 2nd. Sorry about that typo. If you vote absentee in person, you don't need to get the ballot notarized because you're going there in person and you're showing a form of ID to an election official. And so here are the big differences between absentee and mail-in ballots, and why I'm suggesting that the first thing that you want to do is determine whether you might be able to vote absentee. Because as you can see here, there's some slight differences in both how you can request these ballots and how you can return them. So an absentee, in both cases, you have to apply. So in no circumstance will a ballot be automatically sent to you. Missouri is not one of the 5 states. There are 5 states in the country that primarily vote by mail, that send people ballots who are registered to vote automatically. We're not one of those states. Here you have to request a ballot by mail. If what you're requesting is an excuse-based absentee ballot, you can submit that request by email or fax, in addition to sending it in the mail or making that request in person. In contrast, a mail-in ballot, the no excuse version, can only be requested by mail or in person. In both cases, the voter or a close relative within 2 degrees of consanguinity is able to make that request. Similarly, there are differences in how your completed ballot can be returned. An absentee ballot can be returned by United States mail or can be dropped off at your local election office in person. And it can be dropped off by the voter or, again, by a close relative. So my mother, for example, who's 89, she does an absentee ballot. She usually sends it back through the mail, but because I'm a close relative, I could also go drop that off for her if we got a little too tight on time. In contrast, the no excuse mail ballot can only be returned by the United States mail. And because of delays, we strongly recommend that that people who are exercising this option get it done as early as possible, because keep in mind, those mail-in ballots do have to be notarized. And many absentee ballots have to be notarized as well. But those 2 health-based absentee reasons do not have to be notarized. And so if you fall into one of those, then you do not have to get that ballot notarized. So just a couple quick pieces here, and I'll open it up for some conversation, questions, discussion. Once you've figured out which ballot is right for you, you want to go ahead and make that application. Even though absentee voting doesn't start until September 22nd, there's nothing that says you can't get that application in right now. And again, we certainly recommend that, that folks make a plan and get on this early. You make your application to your local election authority. So for those of you who are in Kansas City, if you live within the Kansas City limits, that'll be the Kansas City Election Board. If you live elsewhere in Jackson County, that would be the Jackson County Election Board. Or if you're in Cass County or Platte County, you would be go to the Cass County clerk or the Platte County clerk, not to the Secretary of State's office. Although the Secretary of State does have an application up on his website. On this application, only pick one. Only pick either absentee or mail-in. We saw back in August that there were some people that said, oh, I'm over age 65, so I qualify to vote because I'm in an at-risk category for COVID. And they would check that box. And then they'd say, oh, but I also want a mail-in ballot. And they'd also check that box. That'll mess it up. You can only pick one. You either get an absentee because you have one of those reasons, or you get a mail-in ballot because you don't have a reason. So only pick one of those 2. And you can see here where I've highlighted, if you do pick absentee, you're going to have to select one of the reasons. And regardless of what type of ballot you select, you need to sign that application. If it's not signed, they're not going to be able to process it. Then you need to get that in to your local election authority. Again, those absentee requests can be sent by email or by fax, as well as by mail or in person. There is a deadline. That deadline is October 21st to get that request in. But keep in mind, because they're going to first have to process your request and mail a ballot back to you, that you really want to try and get that done as early as possible, well before October 21st, if you're able to do so. We encourage people to call and check. All absentee ballots have to get tracked. When you make a request, they actually go in and check and confirm your voter registration. So this is one of the security measures that really is in place. It ensures that people who are not registered are not able to get ballots, because they're going to go in and check your voter registration against the information that you provided on that application. And only if they are convinced that you are registered at the address that you say you are, and that you're in fact who you say you are, will they then send that ballot to you. You can call the election authority and check and make sure that they got your request, and they'll also be able to tell you when that ballot got sent back out to you. So once you get that ballot back, go ahead, cast your ballot. If you haven't done a ballot by mail before, it's like the paper ballot. It looks like a paper ballot that you get at the polling place, where you fill in the little circles. Then you're going to put that ballot into the envelope that comes with your ballot. That outer envelope has a form on it that looks a lot like the application. You're going to have to complete that form. And again, you will need to sign that form in front of a notary if applicable. So again, all mail-in ballots will have to be notarized. And many absentee ballots will need to be notarized, but those two health-related ones, if you expect to be confined due to illness or disability, or are serving as a caretaker, or if you fall into one of the risk categories for COVID, that ballot does not need to be notarized. But you do need to sign that ballot envelope. Everybody does. And then you'll mail it back to your local election authority. The deadline is Election Day. And it's the deadline where that ballot has to be received. So it cannot be postmarked on Election Day. Again, if you feel that you are running tight on time, and we saw a lot of people in this situation in August, you can still go vote absentee in person. It's certainly not as safe as staying at home, but it would allow you to avoid a crowded polling place on Election Day. And finally, if you requested either an absentee or mail-in ballot and it was delayed in getting to you, or perhaps it never got to you, or if it got to you but you just didn't get enough time to go through all the steps to get it notarized and get it back in the mail in enough time to have it be received, you can actually go vote on Election Day. You can spoil that ballot or surrender it. In essence, canceling out your request for the mail-in ballot. You turn it in, they tear it up, and you'd be able to cast a ballot at the polls on Election Day in a worst case scenario. So we are working with groups around the state to help make notaries available to people, and that's where some of our arts organization friends are really doing a great job kind of getting the word out and helping connect people with notaries. And I will stop there and see if there's any questions. And of course, you can always call the Election Protection Hotline as well if you have any questions along the way.
Denise?
Yes.
Now, you just covered the part about spoiling the ballots, and that applies. What you said was would apply for both absentee and mail in ballot, you can bring it to the poll on election day and spoil it. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And what about mail-in? If you had requested a mail-in ballot and you got your mail-in ballot before election day and you decided to vote in person absentee, you can do it, you can spoil it that way too. Is that correct?
Yes, but you would have to qualify to vote absentee. So,
okay, gotcha.
right. So you still have to vote absentee, you have to be able to meet one of those 7 reasons. You can vote absentee by getting that ballot in the mail, or you can vote absentee by going to the local election authority and casting an absentee ballot in person.
Okay, thank you.
I think you're on mute.
My microphone. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, there's a couple of questions in the chat, some of which I have heard before, so it'll be good to get feedback on this. If a person submits a request to be a poll worker, which I have actually done as well, but they haven't heard back yet, right? Can they still submit, since we can submit now to vote absentee? Can you still submit for that request for that reason?
Yes, that's a great question. And really the absentee is, what do you reasonably expect that you might be unable to go to the polls for this reason? So if you've applied to be a poll worker, you can in good faith say, I reasonably expect that I may be prevented from going to the polls because I'm going to be a poll worker. Mm-hmm. So yes, you absolutely can.
Sure. And then can you check if your ballot was received online? So I've heard of this tracking as well, but that has been a place that I think at the point where a lot of people, it kind of falls off the cliff, is like, can you check that your ballot was received? It was everything was valid and therefore it was counted?
Well, that's going to depend on your jurisdiction where you are registered. There are 116 different election jurisdictions in Missouri, and they all administer the offices in charge of administering and sending out these ballots. Some have more sophisticated processes than others. So I live in St. Louis. St. Louis County, for example, has like a barcode, or like a blanking on the word, but where you can get a link to track your ballot.
QR code?
Yes, that's the word. Yes, a QR code. But not all jurisdictions do. Sure. But you can always, do it the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and calling your local election authority if they don't provide an online.
So calling them, they basically assure you they can track via your registration. Yes, we track that you because they track all of the steps of it. We received your request for the ballot. We received your return ballot, and it's reasonable to think that will be counted, right? Yeah. They could tell you, we received your ballot and such was wrong, so we've now show that we have sent you an additional one or something to let you know that we need some kind of new information. Is that correct?
Well, that's a really great point, actually, because there may be circumstances, and we saw this a lot in the August elections, if you don't fill out everything on that ballot envelope form, it's possible that they will reject that application. Some jurisdictions are better than others at letting people know that there is a deficiency on that form, and some of them sort of run out of time. So I'll use St. Louis County again as an example. There were a lot of applications. You have to confirm your address on this form. And that's because, again, they're checking to make sure that you are registered to vote at your address. And St. Louis County's envelope has a checkbox that, in lieu of rewriting your address in, because it's already printed there on the envelope, right, you can check and say, yes, this is still my address.
Right.
It was my address 2 weeks ago when I sent you the application. It's still my address today. That checkbox was real small, and there were a lot of people that filled everything out except the checkbox. And they were running out of time. It was right before the election, and actually a bunch of volunteers from the Voter Protection Coalition um, worked with the St. Louis County Board of Elections. They got deputized, and St. Louis County let them call those voters and let them know that check the checkbox, and they would have to either complete a new ballot or come down to the election board and check that checkbox. They unfortunately were not able to verbally take the order and check it for them.
Right.
So some jurisdictions are going to be better than others at contacting people. I believe Kansas City makes an effort to contact people if there are deficiencies in that ballot. But
sure.
Just another good reason to check.
Yeah, and like St. Louis, it's a big authority, so there's a lot of people there working on it. I know that is an issue, particularly of people who've lived in the same place they voted for 40 plus years. Someone who's someone who's owned their home and worked or voted out of that address for decades. They in this situation, I would caution against saying, oh, well, they know me. They know who I am. I mean, my stuff hasn't changed in years and years and years. For the sake of getting your ballot counted, please fill out all information. Another thing I point out often too, your local election authority is different from your polling location. I think some people, might understand that, but some people don't. And so if I've put in the chat and for posterity's sake, whoever reads this in the future, it's a very easy Google. Just Google Secretary of State, Mo, and election authority, and a screen. You will go to the website, and it has a drop-down menu of your county. So as long as you know what county you live in, you will find it will give you all of the information you need, from phone number, fax, email address often, and the website to your local election authority. That is where everything is housed. Your polling location is just a little kind of spider web extension of that to cast as many ballots as possible within that day. So please don't confuse that. Everything goes through them. Denise, two more things real quick, and then we'll let you go because I know you're busy. Are you advising people to, I know a lot of people in my private work, I'm advising a lot of people to think of their new election date as October 23rd. That's 2 Fridays before Election Day. You will have been able to complete everything you should be able to complete by that time, including sending back your ballot. But it is most effective that if you put your ballot in the mail by that date, or consider that date your new election day. So everything you would do for November 3rd, do for October 23rd. You will be safer rather than more cutting it closer. Would you agree with that, Denise?
Yeah, I mean, and obviously I can't make any guarantees about the Postal Service, but people are legitimately concerned about postal delays, and we did see quite a few postal delays leading into the August elections that did delay people both from getting their ballot in the mail and then also returning that ballot in the mail.
Sure.
So, absolutely, as early as you can do it. We are encouraging people to make a plan and get it done as early as possible if you're going to use the mail to help it guarantee that your ballot will get there in time, and that you're not going to be cutting it too close.
Too close, yeah. And then finally, is it fair to say, Denise, so correct me, the simplest way to vote outside of going to your polling location, filling out like normal, in this new climate, the simplest way to vote in this state is, if you select absentee, that you fall into one of the excuse categories of COVID, so no notaries required, or you fall into you are confined to your home, or you care for someone who is confined to their home. And I will remind people, it does not say you care for a family member. It says you care for someone. Is that correct, Denise?
Yeah, it's the language says that you serve as a primary caretaker for somebody, but
not a family member. So my point with that is that it's not necessarily just your mom. It could be a neighbor that you serve as a primary caretaker for, et cetera. So those two excuses,
or home health aide, right,
are the simplest way to vote in this state. You will request the absentee ballot. You will get it in the mail. You select one of those two options, and it goes in. No questions asked, no notary. Well, I shouldn't say no questions asked, but no notary is needed. Those two ways are the simplest way to vote in the state, just as a reminder.
And those ballots can be returned in person as well as by mail. So that's another thing. If you do find yourself procrastinating a little bit, you can ultimately return those to your local elections office, in your county elections office. If you're in a big city, it's an election board. If you're in a smaller county in Missouri, it's your local clerk's office. Sure, and that again is where what you will find on that Secretary of State website, that place. So it is. There's little to no reason to not request absentee since you can spoil it if you prefer to vote on the day, and because there are two mechanisms by which you can return it, either mailing it back in or returning it to the local election authority at your leisure anytime between the time you get it and the time of the election, by the end of the day on the day before election day. So any other questions from anyone? Just unmute and chime in. Otherwise, we will let Denise go. But I'm going to give anyone else a final chance to ask a question.
Hello. I wanted to ask if perhaps if the Postal Service has discussed or announced increased staffing during the time period between the deadline to postmark your mail-in ballots and election day, because that could certainly help efforts. I believe that they increased staffing around the winter holidays in order to make sure all the packages in mail during that time is delivered, and perhaps they could make a similar effort around the election.
Yes, well, that would rely on them to be properly funded. And that is a fight that the Postal Service is currently having with Congress right now as we speak. There is legislation that is pending that would provide funding to the Postal Service. Right now, that does not exist. And in fact, what we saw recently over the summer is that they actually had to suspend all overtime at the Postal Service and suspend other kinds of staffing. And so that's why in recent weeks you have seen, in recent months, you've seen some delays in your mail service, not just for ballots, but for other things as well. I mean, keep in mind that, people get medication by United States Postal Service, important, legal documents and contracts. We saw this administration make threats to further cut funds from the United States Postal Service. So this battle is happening in Washington right now as we speak. I'm hopeful that that our lawmakers will appreciate the importance of fully funding the Postal Service in light of the enormous anticipated increases in mail-in ballots this year.
Thank you.
One can only hope. One can only hope. Thank you so much, Denise. With that, we will let you go. But I want to thank everyone for joining us. A reminder that this is, hopefully not the last conversation we will have regarding these issues before Election Day. And it is a critical time to, ensure everyone has the necessary tools to cast that ballot. So thank you so much, Denise. With that, have a great day, everyone. And we appreciate your attending with us.
I appreciate it. I wanted to give one final plug. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition does meet every Monday and through Zoom conference calls. And if you would like to get on that list, or if you want to just get on the mailing list we periodically, once or twice a week, send out emails with links to resources, to webinars, we'll put links to like the palm cards and all those other materials online. You can do so by texting MOVPC to 66866.
Excellent. I will include, Denise, I will include that in we will send out an e-blast this Thursday with this recording for people, and I will include that in there if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So that people can know that as well. So perfect. All right. Thank you so much, Denise. We appreciate having you. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Bye-bye.
in summer, you can see it fading fast. So you grab a piece of something that you think is gonna last. Well, you wouldn't even know a diamond if you held it in your hand. The things you think are precious, I can't understand. Are you reeling in the years, stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? Are you reeling in the years, stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? You've been telling me you're a genius since you were 17. In all the time I've known you, I still don't know what you mean. The weekend at the college didn't turn out like you planned. The things that pass for knowledge I can't understand. Are you reeling in the years,